share my screen again and go to the next speaker, which is, I think, Jan Willem.
Yes, excellent. So, waiting 1 sec for the presentation being put on screen. Was so interesting to hear what is happening from a French perspective, and there has been so much developments in the Netherlands as well. I think maybe to start off, the aim of the Dutch government is very clearly to ensure that business will continue as much as possible. So to avoid a big drop in economic activity by companies taking all kind of measures to let people go, etc. So there are many measures to try to keep the businesses bridging the period that the virus lasts, and hopefully keeping that as short as possible, as I'm sure we all wish. Couple of measures that we would explicitly like to take a look at, and there's a very extended version of there are many measures being taken by the Dutch government, varying from for small companies, for self-employed, for large companies, for people that need additional support. But we would like to take out a couple of the measures. And the one I'm going to speak about is the deferral scheme for tax payments. As we've seen with our business partners, that has gotten a lot of attention at the moment. Dutch government was quite quick in announcing a measure saying that every company being severely impacted by the COVID-19 crisis can request for an extension for paying its taxes. That was originally aimed at 3 kinds of taxes: the corporate tax, wage tax, and VAT, where it was mentioned that you could get a 3-month extension for payment upon request without additional details required, or you can request for a period of up to 12 months. But then there are some conditions, and I will get back to you on that a bit later on. It is good to mention that in the meantime, quite a lot of changes have already happened. As you may imagine, that a lot of companies have requested for deferral of payments, which also put a lot of pressure on the tax administration. Although I must say I'm very impressed by the way that they are picking this up. So what happened so far? The list of taxes has been extended. So besides the corporate income tax, wage tax, and VAT, also excise duties and custom tariffs, insurance tax, gambling tax, energy tax, other environmental taxes, and some other smaller taxes have been included in the scope. So for all these taxes, you can request for an extension for paying those taxes over to the government. 3-month period is always granted. A longer period may be granted as well. Which taxes are not covered? That may be the easier approach, and that is dividend withholding tax, and that links in very closely to what was just mentioned in France, and that is that the companies are asked not to pay out dividends. Reason why? Well, all these measures are aimed to help business bridge the gap for the liquidity gap that may be a consequence of the COVID crisis. So, and for one specific case where we saw that it was not covered is road tax, which may be a relevant tax for a limited group of companies. The fact that it's not covered does not mean that you cannot request for extension of payment, but it does not go through this accelerated and very easy scheme. To the next slide, please. How does it work to apply for these for the deferment of tax payment? Well, you can apply for it online. There's an online portal where you can request for the deferment. or you can do so per letter to the tax authorities in Heerlen. That's the central office that's used to dealing with large number of requests. So that's the reason why they opened that. The slight benefit of doing it per letter is that you can give a bit of additional clarification of why you are requesting it and what the financial position of your company is. And I will return to that point at the end of this slide. Please note that you can only request for deferment of payment if there is a tax assessment currently outstanding. So you cannot request for a blanket approval for the next 3 months of assessments that you may receive, but you must already have one assessment open. Let's take a look at the wage tax, for example. If you withheld wage tax in February, that means that you needed to declare the tax in your tax return for the end of March. But the system that we have is that you file a tax return and then subsequently you make the payment on the amount that was filed in your tax return. If you fail to pay, you will get a couple of weeks later an assessment saying, well, you failed to pay, and you have another couple of days to make the payment. So you already see that we're talking about February taxes, of which the tax assessment is likely to arrive somewhere, in the course of this week, actually. So only once that assessment has been received, you can request for the extension. If it's put into the tax systems or in the systems of the tax authorities that you requested for the extension and you're eligible, then automatically all the assessments that will be received in the next 3 months will be included and will get the same extension. So again, let's say that you have made your first request, let's say per the 15th of April. It means that all tax assessments following in the next 3 months will have a 3-month period. So the 15th of July when they will become payable. So it's not that if you receive an assessment on the 15th of May that you will get 3 months as from that day. As I mentioned, 3 months for all assessments. If you wish to have a longer term extension, that is possible, but you do need to have an external declaration, for example, from your auditor or branch organization. Details are still being worked out by the tax authorities, in which you can indicate why you need longer than 3 months of extension of payment. There's one exception. If you have less than 20,000 euros of tax debt in this period, the burden of proof is a bit less. As the tax authorities are expecting that it may be a bit, messy is maybe not the right word, but it is complex, the large numbers to be dealt with by the tax authorities, and to make it as low and as simple to enter as possible, they also reduced the interest on late tax payments and the tax interest to 0.01%. Why not 0? Well, that was technically apparently not possible. But if you imagine that normal tax rates are 4%, normal interest rates are 4% and 8%, this is quite a significant step down. Also, penalties for late payment will be waived. So once again, if you have your wage tax due over the period of February and you failed to pay in March, you would normally get in the middle of April, you get an assessment, and that includes a penalty. Well, that penalty will not apply. It has been opened on the 19th of March, and this arrangement for so far is till the end of till 19 June 2020. Last point to make, normally if you cannot pay your tax bills, you need to notify the tax authorities that you're having insolvency issues. That reduces the risk for the directors of the company. And And the question here is, well, if you request for a deferment of payment, does that count as a insolvency declaration? Our advice would be to make it clear whether you're requesting this just to get a bit more liquidity because of the uncertainty of the situation, or to explicitly make such a statement. Next slide, please. A quick summary. What steps should you be thinking about the deferment of tax payments? Question one, our ministry was quite generous in giving a lot of aid to a lot of companies with one big request. And the request was, please ensure that you only request for all this money that's becoming available for business if you really need it. So question one, in our perspective, is do you need to get an extension for payment, or can you deal with it yourself through your credit lines that you already have available, or if you have sufficient cash reserves. A very simple quick win to improve your cash position would be to reduce your preliminary tax assessment 2020 for corporate income tax. If you're making payments on account for 2020 and due to the crisis, you expect no longer a profit for 2020, you can easily change it to a zero assessment and get a refund of everything you've already paid and stop payments on account. Another quick win could be changing your VAT period. If you're on a monthly VAT payment period, you may change it to quarterly, so you have a cash flow advantage. If you're in a refund position, you may change it from a quarter to, for example, a month, so that you get your cash back quicker. We also, so just to mention again, you can only request for deferring your tax payments after you received your assessment. If you file to request before you have received an assessment, the request will just be ignored. So please bear that in mind. Please also bear in mind that there are a lot of requests going in. So it does mean that that it may take a bit of time. And last, if you file the request at the central tax office, please also copy in your local tax inspector who you have the relationship with, so that they understand what's happening. I want to keep it with that and move over to my colleagues, after which I think we're open to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you, Jan Willem, for your explanation about the tax measurements. I will tell something now about the measurements that have been taken more from an employment law and employment tax perspective, together with MA, who will follow up after me. So yeah, the Dutch government recently provided details around the compensation scheme, and it's named the Temporary Emergency Scheme for Work Retention Scheme, but it's also known as the NOW scheme. And this scheme is one of the measures implemented in order to mitigate, well, let's say, the magnitude of the financial consequences for employers. So it is implemented to ensure as much as possible that companies can continue to pay their employees and that forced redundancies are avoided. The NOW compensation is applicable initially for a period of 3 months, and after this period, a one-off extension of another 3 months can be requested, but that will be followed up later on. Now, what does the NOW scheme entail? So under this scheme, employers continue to pay the employee's salary for 100%, so the full salary, but they do receive a substantial compensation of the wage cost, and it's up to 90% of the wage sum. There's a certain maximum, but MA will talk later about it. And this compensation, they will receive it from the Dutch Labor Authority. It's called the UWV. This compensation applies with respect to employees with both a permanent and a flexible contract. So also, let's say, to on-call workers. So workers who are called upon to work for only a few hours per week, and those hours can change every week or every month. On the slide, you see an overview of the exact amount of compensation. And the exact amount of compensation depends on the percentage of loss in turnover revenue. But it never exceeds 90% of the wage sum for the 3-month period. So let's say if there's 100% loss in turnover, a good example may be restaurants or bars, as they all closed. They don't have any revenue. And then again, the compensation of 90% of the employer's wage sum. If there's only 50% turnover loss, it's 45%. And 25% loss in turnover, there's a compensation of 22.5% of the employer's wage sum. And in order to qualify for the now compensation, employers must demonstrate that they expect at least 20% loss of turnover for a consecutive period of 3 months. And that period can be calculated as of the 1st of March, the 1st of April, or the 1st of May of this year. And it will be compared to the turnover over the full year of 2019, divided by 4, so a quarter. But maybe we'll discuss this in further detail later during the presentation. If you can go to the next slide, please. So during the time that the compensation is granted, employers should in principle refrain, so they should not request permission from the Dutch Labour Authority to give notice of termination of employment contracts due to business economic reasons. So normally, if you want to terminate employment contracts because of business economic reasons, then you have to step to the Dutch Labour Authority and you have to ask them to grant you permission to terminate the contract. So in principle, they say you should not ask permission, at least until the 31st of May. But if an employer nonetheless does submit such a request, the UWV will deal with the request. So they will look into it, but they will check if the now compensation is not sufficient for the employer to keep its employees employed. So there will be a test, and it's expected to be a strict test. An employer needs to make sure that it could not avoid any redundancies, even when it received the now compensation. And also, there may be a cut in the compensation if you submit the request. So you can still submit the request, but there might be consequences, or it will be very difficult to be granted permission to terminate the contract. However, terminations are still possible. For instance, if an employee is at the moment in the trial period, so if you hired an employee just a few weeks ago, it may be wise from an employer's perspective at least to terminate the contract. Furthermore, you can still terminate contracts if there's inadequate performance of an employee, or if an employee has been sick for more than 2 years. Definite term contracts, that you can let them expire, and they will expire by operation of law, so automatically. And of course, you can always discuss with employees if they want to terminate the contract by mutual consent, so you can formalize it by a settlement agreement. Other alternatives we see at the moment is also that employers ask their employees to give their consent with taking up their holidays or going on unpaid leave, but this will always require consent from the employee. You cannot do that unilaterally as an employer. Furthermore, if there is a works council in place at the company, and companies are obliged to have a works council if they have 50 employees or more, then you need to inform the works council that the compensation has been granted. And as a final note, we emphasize that this now measurement, it only applies to compensation of wages of employees. So for independent contractors, so self-employed persons, There's another measure that is part of the government's emergency package, but we will not dive into that today. May, if you can take it over.
Yeah, sure. Looking at the now measurement in a more deeper perspective, there are two important variables for the height and the amount of the subsidy that you're eligible for. The first item is the wage sum. The subsidy is based on your wage sum of January 2020. That wage tax return has already been filed to the Dutch tax authorities, and that number is therefore also known to the UWV. The wage sum consists of the wage for social security contributions, and it includes your own employees, so the permanent and the flex contracts. The hired in and payroll workers are therefore not included in your wage sum. As Dennis already mentioned, there is a maximum that is 9,538 euros gross per month. If you have employees who have more salary, that is not included in your subsidy amount. Other employers' costs are not included. So there is a surcharge of 30%, which is a fixed percentage for all employers, and that should cover costs for pension, holiday allowance, and other employers' contributions premiums. This is all designed to keep the regulation and the implementation as simple as possible. Next slide, please. The wage sum of January is the basis for your amount of subsidy that you receive. But another important variable is your expected drop in turnover. You can apply for the subsidy if you expect a turnover drop of 20% in a 3-month period. And that 3-month period can start on the 1st of March, the 1st of April, or the 1st of May. This is done because it might be that the COVID crisis does not impact your businesses right away in March, but you experience some delay in the drop, and therefore you can delay it with 2 months. The turnover is compared to your turnover of calendar year 2019, so the 12 months in calendar year 2019 divided by 4. So you have a 3-month period in 2019, and you compare it to the 3 months starting 1st of March, starting 1st of April, starting 1st of May in 2020. And if that is a drop of at least 20%, then you're eligible for the now measurement. So it includes 3 times the January wage sum, the drop in turnover, and then 90%. It's times 90%. You will receive an advance payment of 80%, and afterwards the subsidy is based on your actual turnover drop. So you make now an estimation of your turnover drop, but afterwards it's calculated, and it should be supported by an auditor's report what your actual turnover drop was. It's good to note that the actual wages that you paid in March, April, and May are not important for the amount of subsidy that you receive. It's only if your wage sum in those months is lower than 3 times the January wage sum, then you will have to pay back the subsidy. The background of this is that the measurement is intended to keep all the employees, to keep their jobs, to have some income. That is the background of the measurement. And therefore, if your wages drop, you have to pay a refund. Are your wages higher in the month? That is, unfortunately, you won't receive a higher subsidy. If you look at the expected turnover drop, you have to look at the group. If your company is part of a group of companies, a concern, then all the turnover should be included. In principle, it's only the Dutch companies and foreign companies should be included if they have a wage in the Netherlands. So if they have employees on their payroll for whom they pay social security contributions in the Netherlands. So the assessment is on a group level, but all the wage tax numbers should apply separately. So it might be the case that if you have 20 wage tax numbers within your group, you have 1% of turnover drop, but you have 20 applications with 20 different wage sums. Next slide, please. We've included some numbers. The now measurement is open for application since last week, and it will be open until the 31st of May. The expectation is that a quarter of all employers will apply for the subsidy. And on the first day already 34,000 applications were filed. And in total last week, 80,000 applications have been filed and 1.3 billion has already been paid to employers. So the WV was really fast with making the regulation, but also with the payments. The average loss of turnover now reporting by the application has been 76%. So that's a huge drop in turnover. So you see that this measurement is really necessary. That was my input. So maybe there are some questions. I think there was one question from Fawad, but it already has been answered by Dennis.
Exactly. I don't see any other questions, so I don't know if participants have. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Sylvie Krane. I saw a question about the bank accounts. Are you aware of the bank accounts? I think if I interpret, how do you say that? Interpret. If I understand your question well, it's about having a Dutch bank account. Is that what you mean? That you need a bank? Yes, exactly. Well, we are working on that currently, because actually, in order to apply via the UWV for the now measures, you need to have a Dutch bank account. And we have a lot of clients, French clients, without a Dutch bank account here in the Netherlands. So this is something that we're working on. It's been a few weeks already that I'm working on it. I've spoken to UWV, I've spoken to I'm in touch with quite some politicians. I know there's other parties like RVO, NFIA who are working on it currently. And their aim is now to work it out to be able to either have that the UWV will accept a European bank account. If that is not the case, I'm also in touch with a Dutch bank that will be maybe accept to open Dutch bank accounts, because it's not very easy to open a Dutch bank account if you're a foreign entity. So it's been 2 weeks that I'm working on it, so I know the problem. It's not solved yet, but I do have good hopes that we will be able to solve this.
There was another question from Rodrigo asking what is the total amount of efforts by the Dutch authorities?
Yes, happy to take that one. I think it is difficult to estimate at this moment. They started talking about a total package of 10 to 20 billion, but that was a very rough number to start off with, given that they did not have a clear understanding of what exactly the support was of the different companies. I think one thing is sure, the point that was made by the Minister of Finance is we're going to do whatever is needed. and the financial position of the Netherlands is very healthy with a low state debt and so on. So that is, I think, very helpful, at least to grant a lot of subsidies where necessary. I just see a comment coming in, and I think that's a fair point. The high amount that was mentioned by Mark Rutte also took into account a lot of subsidies there, of guarantees. So it's always difficult to see what the exact amount is that is given to companies if it concerns guarantees, because that will only be visible in a couple of years' time.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions they would like to ask? Now is the time. I
No more
don't see
questions?
any reactions.
No, last chance. If not, I think we should end it.
Thank our speakers, and
Yeah, Claire Monet had to leave the webinar already, but of course I thank her as well. And I would like to thank Dennis Jolie, Jan-Willem Toen en May van der Linden, and of course Manuel de Goeie aussi for preparing this webinar with us. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us and with our participants. Thanks to our participants also to join us. I think we can share also the contact details of Dennis, Jan-Willem, and May and Manuel if you have any questions, if you need help from PwC or anything else that they can support you with. Don't hesitate. I think that's it. So thank you so much and hope to see you soon.
thank you
Well,
very
of course,
much.
virtually, but maybe also face-to-face at some point.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.